everybody. And as always, welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. I'm joined by my friend, companion, partner, best buddy, and man, Led Zeppelin fanatic, just like me, James Anir. How are you today? Show him the album. Talk about the album in the background.
Led Zepp 3, that's in your honor because your favorite Led Zepp song is Immigrant Song. That's when it was on. That is actually 1976 release. It was originally released in 70, but that is a Japanese release. And it has this cool little circular thing that you can spin and their different faces come up in the holes on the cover. So really, really cool and just jamming out, man. So how are
If
things
anybody,
here in Texas? Go ahead.
it's only a balmy 91 today. It was 96 yesterday. We're going down. We feel good. For those of you that, if you ever go to an intensive with Sharon and James, just show up with a nice, moderately priced bottle of whiskey and maybe some Led Zeppelin paraphernalia. You're going to have an extra special intensive. And I want to come to an intensive for just me to come and listen to Led Zeppelin for several hours. So it
Uh,
sounds like fun. How are you and Sharon doing? Talk about your intensives. Talk about, you guys are busy as all get out, man.
It's really wonderful that we are because, primarily that helps more people. The more people we see, the more we can help. And the intensives are primarily what we do. They're for, individuals. So the unfaithful, they're also, or the betrayed. And of course, together, we like to work with couples because we are a couple and we have been successful. That doesn't mean that everybody has to keep their marriage together. Of course, there's always that choice there. And then, so we just love what we do, and we generally work. The length depends on what people need,
Yeah.
but we typically assess that, and that's a 5+ days, and the
Yeah.
days are like 10 to 5. So they're not, we're not going to bury you each day, and we're really attentive to needs. So if
Well,
people want to know, hopeforus.com, HOPEFORUS.com.
and if for those of you, male and female, who are executives or CEOs or COOs, and you feel like, Sam, lay off, dude. I can't disappear for several hours a day, several days a week. Yes, you can, because the great thing about their intensives is they build in hours during the day for you to work and make calls and have meetings and Zooms and all of that. So if you're looking for an intensive, there's no excuse not to give them a shout and reach out to them. I'm pretty full. Let me just tell you, I have people all over the world. I got to meet with some people in Israel the other day that was just a joy. For those of you that might be watching or listening from Israel, you know who you are. I'm honored to be able to spend time with you. I work with people all over the world, and man, I won't talk too much about it because it makes me emotional to think that this screw up over here has been able to do some pretty phenomenal things. I know you feel the same. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is multi-layered and has so much information to give. But let me say this, for those of you who are new to the podcast, we are honored that you're here. We'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. I could pull up our email right now. We've had so many people subscribe over the last 30, 60, 90 days. We're so thankful. We're honored that you're here. You're welcome here, male or female, unfaithful or betrayed. This is, maybe it's not home, but it's another room in your home of recovery. And we're just honored that you would spend this time with us. So let me jump right in. The viewers, the listeners love when we just jump right in. So today's question is pretty sticky. And it's a question that I think there's so much learning that has to go into it conceptually. And my good buddy James is going to do that today. But the question is, what is parental enmeshment and how does it affect a fair recovery? James, I'll pass to you.
It is a big topic, and so this is going to be sort of a pretty in-depth introduction to it, and then we're going to follow up with another podcast on some of the deeper stuff in it. Um, a good definition is this: adult parental enmeshment is a psychological and relational condition where an adult has an excessively close, independent relationship with their parent, to the extent that it interferes with their ability to develop a separate and autonomous identity. So There's a couple of things that go with this. So enmeshment involves blurred boundaries. This is really where the parents' needs, emotions, and opinions heavily influence or dominate the adult child's decisions, actions, and overall life choices. And the adult child may feel responsible for their parents' emotional well-being, leading to challenges in establishing independence. As weird as that sounds, adults can still suffer from this lack of independence and maintaining healthy relationships outside of the parental bond. So, what that kind of means is the parent's unhealthy wants or desires become their needs, and thus the desires and needs of the child and adult child. Go ahead.
We're saying adults, but this can happen as kids, right? This can happen. I mean, I felt like I was enmeshed early on because I felt like I had to help regulate my mom's emotions instead of my mom regulating my emotions. I felt like I had to parent her, which is a term you'll often start to hear more of called parentification, right?
Yes. So this always starts in childhood. So you're not going to
Mm,
develop this as an adult. If it
okay.
hasn't happened as a child, you won't have it as an adult. It's not going to be something that is interfering with your relationship. Not that doesn't mean we don't have responsibilities to our parents, but that is very different. When they get sick or older, and we have to look after them, that's a different thing. So I do want to say that not all unfaithfuls are enmeshed with one of their parents, and it typically is one, not both. Um, and so this is really only one of the many causes for acting out. So abandonment, neglect, modeling, etc. So this is
And
really
this, as we talk about all the time, for you that are watching and listening, especially you betrayeds, this is not just another excuse for their acting out, right? This is not just another thing for them to blame instead of owning. No, no, no. I'm going to say it one way, James, you can say it a different way. This is explaining their behavior. This is helping to identify why they did what they did. This is helping to help the unfaithful know why they did what they did so they can own it, so they can get healthy. Because if they don't know why they did it, how will they prevent it from happening again in the future? So this isn't an excuse or a justification. This is understanding. Am I right?
absolutely, and I think it really actually helps the betrayed to be able to see, why is this happening? What is this thing? I don't get it. Why is, I mean, it doesn't necessarily always look like a mama's boy. It is incredibly divisive in relationships. It's most commonly seen in mother son. That's what we're going to see the most. Mother daughter
Okay.
as well. To a lesser extent, father daughter and father son, and we're not going to really go into the differentiating in this one, but at another time we can and will. Um, what it's really interesting because it really happens in childhood, as you said about yours. Mine was very much the same. My parents divorced or got separated when I was one, ultimately divorced when I was three. And my mother had multiple boyfriends, and really looked to me to carry her, to be her ego, as Sharon says, meaning I was responsible for stabilizing her emotions.
Right.
An age where I had no clue how to co-regulate. It's not like
No.
that. So I became responsible, as you did, for my mother's emotional state. So if I saw her upset, I took it like I was doing something wrong, and then I tried to fix it. It was my responsibility. It actually creates this emotional contract between parent and child.
Because I felt like, ooh, I must have done something wrong. Now I need to fix it. It robbed me because I was a child. It robbed me of my authentic experience of having my own emotions and being able to be okay. So then later on, it showed up where I would cower, or I would just try and fix it, or I would shut down, or I would try and be someone I wasn't, or I would feel like I didn't have boundaries and I didn't have a voice and that I couldn't stand up for myself. I'm kind of going on a tangent. That's how significant it was in my life, James. And you know that. I know that you can attest to it. But like you said, right? It is a contract kind of that we sign because we're kind of forced into it.
Right. It's like, oh, sign this contract so that you can have a safe childhood, right? And yet that contract is for life.
And
But
it's a survival tactic.
yep,
We sign this contract, but this is how we make sense out of life. This is how we survive as a little person. And we have no freaking clue. That's how strongly I feel about it, that it's unhealthy. So we take it into adulthood and we use it as a survival tactic in adulthood. And then someone like you comes along and says, hey, this is not needed right now. We need to get you in your adult self. We need to get you to understand you are not back there anymore. You don't need that. Let me help you. Let me help grow you up, as John Lee would say. Let me help you start to actually live, because everybody around you is going to have a healthier experience as you get healthy, right?
man, you brought up a little emotion for me there, Sam, because that is so true. And I know that there are a lot of hard things I've had to do in my life. This is one of the hardest, and there's a reason for that, right? Um, and so because I identify all of our well-being then with that particular parent's well-being. If they're not okay, we're not okay.
Oh
And
my gosh, absolutely. And it's a crushing experience for a little person, and we take it into adulthood. So here's those of you that are watching and listening, here's how it plays out. My spouse is not okay, so now I'm not okay, and both of us are now spiraling. When our spouse is predominantly, let's say, a betrayed, male or female, needs us to be strong and to be okay when they're not okay, but then we make it about us and we freak out or we panic or we try and fix them, when the betrayed in this case really just wants to be seen and heard and validated and be able to fall apart and have us not fall apart and show up for them. But then we circle the drain. So it's at this point I say, so give the audience some signs. We're already sharing it. We're already down. We're doing 95 and a 69 Camaro with Led Zeppelin playing. But what are some signs and illustrations, if you will, or examples of what it feels like, predominantly for the enmeshed?
so let's say that somebody came up to you and said, "Who are you, man?" Right? How do we normally, I mean, in this society period, we normally go, well, I'm a firefighter, or I'm a therapist, or I'm this, or I'm that. But really, it's that, who am I? We struggle with who we really are, our personal identity, right? When we're enmeshed. So there's confusion. It's really hard to identify. This is who I am. We might know some of our values, we might know some of the things that we like, but to really be able to say, yeah, this is who I am, separate from my parents' influence. We don't know where that ends or begins, or
Right.
our own begins, right? So there's this feeling sort of a lack of autonomy, kind of being unable to make decisions without considering what the parent wants. So we're kind of confusing that with their wants versus their needs, right? We kind of make their wants our needs, and sometimes we even go to the extent of needing our parents' input or approval. You know, which leads us to always wanting to please mom or dad, if that's the case. But it's also people pleasing is a common thing, like people pleasing all around. We have low self-esteem, low self-worth because we rely on that parent's validation, and that validation really only comes when we're doing what they want, feeding them, feeding their emotional vacuity. Is that a word? The vacuum. Right?
Yeah.
And then we end up feeling like we're stagnated, we're stuck, unable to progress in life, right? Due to basically our parents' controlling influence. I do want to say something here as an aside, but needed. As a therapist, one of the toughest things that we have is when somebody comes in who is enmeshed because they defend their experience as a child and at least that particular parent uh, to the nth degree. And so
Yeah.
really you have to look at, then you have to look at, this isn't a blame thing. This is what was your experience? What is your experience? Right. So there's a lot of resistance there to getting help. So that's part of what we're doing here is to try to say, hey, this happens a lot. And we can help it.
Absolutely. I think I learned this from another therapist I mentioned often, named Amanda Sprona. She talked about dual reality. I can celebrate my mom for how courageous she was. She raised me almost by herself in a very tough neighborhood and worked her butt off and was an incredibly courageous woman. And she parentified me and neglected me and made me feel so responsible for her emotions and like I never knew what kind of a mood she was dealing in. It's dual reality. It's not either or black and white thinking. I don't have to put my mom in a box. I can say she was awesome. Man, there was some painful experiences because that brings difficulty in our primary relationships as we get older, right?
It does, because it makes it really hard to establish and maintain healthy relationships. And we'll get into one of the reasons, or a few of the reasons for that. But one of them is, that it creates conflict because
Mm-hmm.
it's constant for the enmeshed. There's this constant inner tug of war between the desire to be with our partners and then the loyalty or contractual responsibility and fear of disapproval or rejection by disappointing that parent. I'm just going to say mother there because that's my experience.
Sure.
And then, it creates a sort of this overall anxiety about making independent choices and the potential consequences of those. It's not just simply, oh, I'm going to make this choice and here are the possible consequences, positive and negative, out in the world. That exists still, right? But it's also this consequence of how is mom going to feel about that.
For those of us that see it in our partners, for those of us that have walked through it, maybe even as they're listening, the lights are coming on a little bit. Our hope is that they would understand the unnecessary burden that this is. It's a burden in their relationship, it's a burden in their own life, right?
Yeah, so the enmeshed adult child carries the emotional burden, right, of the parent's needs and expectations. So they feel a hyper responsibility toward the parent in part because parent demands it, and often will reinforce that with acting helpless, and there's this conditioning that happens of the child who then is now an adult. We also feel really the emotional burden can feel really overwhelming. Um, that's caused in part by the over involvement of a parent in most or all aspects of our life and their demands.
And then we transfer this onto our partner as adults.
What we can't place on our mom will project onto our partner. And so all of that anger and resentment that we built for not having an appropriate childhood where we could develop properly and experience play and develop socially. I mean, it damages that. It damages our courting, which we learn in social interactions as we're growing up. It establishes this resentment early on that then is taken into every relationship we have with females moving forward, because it's modeled for us that if we don't do this, then we won't be loved, and that makes love a transactional arrangement rather than experiencing unconditional love. So we, even though the unconditional love may be there from our partner, we always will see it as a transactional. Okay, I'm going to pay for this, and I'm going to pay heavily for it. So there's the resentment towards the parent, but then it's because I can't possibly put that on my parent because it's going to threaten my existence, which it would as a child, not as an adult, but
Right.
as a child. So the overall feeling there is one of survival, but I can put that on. This is not a conscious thought. I can safely put that on my partner, or and generally same gender as the parent that is the enmesher.
You're exactly right. Because if we were to put it on the parent would overpower us. They would one up us. They would put us in our position. Typically, maybe it was physical violence, maybe it was overpowering us with rage and emotion. And so we would shut down. But then with our partner, we will then have these $10,000 reactions at a $50 problem or $50 reaction from our partner. And now we're spiraling. There's several times with couples I have to say to a client, listen, I think that you are transferring onto your wife some serious mom issues. And I've got a couple clients I'm sure that are listening going, Sam, why do you keep talking about me? I'm really not even thinking about you. But the fact is, this is so prominent. This is so widespread in this dynamic that this happens time and time again. That's why I love today, because I feel like this is a great opportunity to help some people find some freedom and some clarity. If you're an unfaithful, our hope is that you would look back and go, huh, maybe I am transferring onto, in this dynamic, my wife, some pretty serious mom stuff. If I could just step back and stop being exhausted at trying to keep everybody happy, I might be able to find some clarity and some freedom, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's another result of this is being just exhausted. It is absolutely exhausting to try to balance this, and I have I have experienced that. Sharon had to say to me to wake me up to it, but although it took a lot more work than just waking me up to it, she had to say, you're going to have to choose who's first here, me or your mom, and if it's your mom, we can't continue. You know,
Okay.
she didn't quite put it that way, but actually she did.
But but listen, okay, we're going to take a time out here for all of you that are watching and listening. I think that is a phenomenal moment. That might be a moment that you, the viewer or listener, need to have. Are you going to make this about mom, or are you going to make this about your partner? That's not shame. That's, if this resonates with you, it might be time to ask yourself, how enmeshed were you? How enmeshed are you? And find an expert, find a third party who is knowledgeable about this stuff that can help set you free, or at least provide a roadway, a pathway out of this prison. Because that's really what it is. Don't you agree? It's a prison to be stuck
It
in.
is. Well, I mean, just think about the resentment part. You feel a resentment, but you also feel guilty at the same time for having the resentment, right? And so, what does that say? I don't know which way to go. So basically, yes, that's a prison, and it isn't of our own making for once, right?
That's exactly
It was
right.
made else. It was made during childhood, and like I said, this doesn't just pop in as an adult. It's not one of those things. You can't.
It's not a it's not a get out of jail free card either for the unfaithful. I was just enmeshed,
Uh,
and you should leave me alone, and you should be nice, and
oh,
you should be kind and sweet to me, because this
well,
wasn't my fault.
so that would be a classic reaction of somebody who is in mesh.
So, okay, so we're talking about all of this. It's really heavy stuff.
It is.
So
Uh,
when we study the I forget the exact term of the people that watch and listen to us. We have so many betrayeds who listen, who are using this for their own help and trying to help their partner. Maybe they're engaged, maybe they're not. But for partners of the enmeshed who are sitting here going, finally, at least our hope is, finally somebody's making sense and talking about this stuff. How do we help the partners?
I think it's really important to be able to sort of get clear on what it feels like to be a partner of somebody who's enmeshed. And not all, just so you know, not all enmeshed people cheat on their partners.
Absolutely. Great point.
Now,
Great point.
betray is arguably it's an emotional betrayal, right, of the partner when we're more loyal to our mother than we are to them, right, when they are put second. So there's going to be frustration, anger, sadness, feeling conflicted, feeling disempowered. Here's a big one: feeling dismissed,
Hmm.
overlooked, undervalued, because your partner, as I just said, prioritizes their parents' needs and opinions over yours. That can lead to insecurity. So feeling insecurity about where am I in my partner's life, in our married life, where, or just partnered life, and questioning that partner's loyalty and priorities, feeling conflicted, facing the and actually being in conflict with the
Right.
enmeshed. So there's frequent conflicts, frequent disagreements, and it all stems from those enmeshment issues.
And wouldn't you say that it just also, for some, not all, because some parents are have passed on. Some parents are in a no contact state. People sometimes drift away from their parents, but isn't there just a constant interference with this stuff? It's like you can't really have a clear conversation. You can't have an easy conversation because it's just like maybe there's meddling if the in-laws and outlaws, as they say, are still around, but doesn't it just cause massive confusion?
It does, and there's like even if the parent, the enmeshed parent, is gone, moved away, or even passed away, there's still going to be effects from this unless the enmeshed adult child does some work on it, because there's always going to be this feeling of I'm doing something wrong by
Yeah.
being independent, by being in love with my partner, and so on. But let's say that they're alive, and this doesn't. They could be halfway around the world, and this could still happen. There's a lack of privacy. You feel so. This is again for partners. There's a feeling that you have little to no privacy, because your partner, not just because mom may keep coming around, unexpectedly dropping in, um, or call all the time, but also because your partner, the enmesh, may be sharing intimate details of your all's relationships with that parent. Um, you can feel a lack of independence. Like your partner can't make decisions without their parents'
Yeah.
input, approval, or at least considering what their parents' needs and what they might. Oh, I can't really go away for a week because mom might need this, and so on. You're going to feel likely an emotional distance. That's the second feeling secondary, right, to your partner's relationship with their parent. That leads to an emotional neglect within the primary relationship, within, if it's a marriage or not. Boundary issues. Man, the boundary issues that you can have in a partnership, setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, really can't happen because the enmeshed inability, because they never learned this, to enforce boundaries with their parent, is there. And if they
Yeah.
can't do that, they really can't accept boundaries elsewhere, because there are no boundaries between,
Right.
say, mom and son in this. So here's a big one: feeling like the enmeshed mom is the third person in the relationship. This is interesting because it feels like she's actually there in the room everywhere
Right.
you're in, including the bedroom, at every meal, and so on. And guess what? Effectively, emotionally, she is.
Yeah. And then trying to make decisions is a circus, right? Because there's that
Yeah.
interference.
Yeah, that need for the enmesh to consider the parent all the time. So making decisions as a couple really is trying almost triangulated, right?
Don't we feel a massive amount of guilt and resentment too when we're enmeshed?
We do, and also, guess what? The partner feels that, right?
Yeah.
You might be like, well, why would the partner feel guilty? But they generally, it's because they want more independence in the relationship for them and their and the enmeshed, and feel resentful towards the enmeshed and their parent, and then feel guilty for that because that's the person they love, and it's that person's mom or dad. So it's an odd thing to feel guilt and resentment. Well, the resentment not so much, but the guilt
Right.
is weird, right? But it can be there, and so partners, if you feel guilty in this situation, it's okay, it's normal, right?
Yeah.
To feel usual.
Yeah.
Normal, it's not a good word there, but usual to feel
Well,
that.
and it's also usual that the partner of the enmeshed feels just exhausted and burnt out.
Yeah. So that emotional burnout that, sure, an enmesh can feel by trying to keep things balanced. This is also about balance, but it's about, for partners, it's about trying to balance the marital relationship and not disturb the enmeshed parental relationship, because what if I'm not chosen? What if
Yeah.
that creates so much of a disruption that we're constantly arguing about it, and so on.
So maybe we talked a lot about this in the front. So maybe just a quick little caveat, but how does this happen? Like, how does this really take shape? That might really help the
Okay.
partner understand, and both parties actually, even the enmeshed, maybe go, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so actually, it's a really good time to sort of recap that. So typically, this happens to kids who are sensitive and empathetic, which the trades out there might be going, "What?" But here's the thing: they're the most likely to become enmeshed. They'll also lose that capacity to be sensitive and empathetic in defending or trying to survive as a child, teen, and then obviously adult. So what is happening, just in very basic terms, one of the parents is overly and inappropriately reliant on, most often, one child for emotional support. The child then is kept from becoming emotionally independent, or separating from their parents, resulting in dependence on soothing and coping from the parent rather than developing it themselves.
That's so good because we just want to be soothed. We want to be cared for. We want to be made to feel good, only positive and encouraged. Hence, when our partner isn't doing that, we go outside the relationship and we fall prey to being worshiped and adored by a third party, which opens us up to having to listen to a podcast like this because we were so craving, right, to be affirmed and coddled and loved and encouraged. And we become like I was 20 years ago, an applause addict, an affirmation addict, an
Or,
encouragement addict. Make me feel good because I
yeah,
just was not healthy enough to hear the truth, to be
right.
able to hear where I was missing it.
And if mom set it up so that mom is the only one who can validate you, and mom is the only one who can make you feel like you're worth something, who can acknowledge and affirm your emotions, well, then you don't know how to do that for yourself, and then you go on being that's emotionally dependent on mom for affirmation, for validation, and nurture. We can end up seeking that also from elsewhere, because when we have emotional needs as a child, they become desperations as an adult when they're not met as a child. And enmeshment, they are not met at all. Uh,
Okay. We could do another podcast just on that sentence, but
Good.
okay, that was phenomenal. Now we're in the home stretch and we're
Yep.
trying to be mindful of time. And we warned everybody this is a big, big podcast today. It's a big topic. So what do we do about it? What can the enmesh do? They sit here going, okay, James, Sam, you pegged me. Now what do I do?
All right, so you've heard this, and I will admit it's not as deep as I like to go. You know, Sam, how encyclopedic I am. I have to work hard to get these outlines down into something manageable. Um, so let's get real about how has affected and continues to affect your life and your marriage or partnership. Right, that's number one. Number two, unequivocally put your partner first. They've got to be number one. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're of faith, then God or your higher power is number one. Your partner and kids are number two. And then guess what? Mom must then become, at most, third level. So I'm going to give you just a couple of practical don'ts. Do not talk badly about your partner to your parents or parent.
Yeah.
Do not use your parent as a confidant. That'll increase dependence, and it's an emotional betrayal of your partner. And do not be your parent's confidant, because that's what's been happening. That keeps you in that role of their emotional support. There's another piece to this too. Let's say it's mom. You've replaced dad.
Mm,
Boy, you've replaced dad. Now you're in a superior position, even as a child, to dad.
right.
If you've replaced dad by continuing to be mom's confidant, you're continuing to divide their relationship. These next parts are really about what can you do for you to build up who you are, to get that sense of self. You have to become guilt resistant, because that parent is going to use guilt to keep you there. So you
And
have to.
it's their own subconscious. It's not like they are
No, they're
this
not.
this is in the subconscious.
They're not there like a puppeteer consciously manipulating the strings. They do it unconsciously, and no matter how obvious it is to the partner or to any or most people in the world that it's happening. It's not obvious to the enmeshed and it's not obvious to the enmesher, right? So
Right.
over time, when we're experiencing this, of course we internalize what's expected of us and we feel guilt if we fail to meet those expectations. And we end up believing that setting boundaries or having our own opinions or doing things that we want to do is wrong. And that includes doing things that we want to do as a couple, right? Is wrong because it violates these internalized rules that have been in place since we were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How does a parent keep us there? So this is something that to remember as you're trying to break away from guilt. If we go against what's expected, we'll be told we're wrong, selfish, uncaring, and sometimes family and sort of family friends are brought in to bring pressure on us. Oh, you really should call your mom. Oh, your mom's really, really hurting right now. You need to think about that. Maybe you shouldn't go on vacation right now, and so on.
I think it's also essential that we create a sense of self, right? Because we find ourselves in the opinion of others. If we don't create our own sense of self, we're doomed.
Yeah, this is maybe the hardest part of this,
Mhm.
because we have to actually change that internalization of mom's beliefs about us and those rules that we've learned. Um, and to do that, I mean, we're talking about since a very young age, so it's become a part of us, right? And so to change that means we've got to work constantly against that internal guilt, um, changing an entire internal belief system about myself or who I am. And that is huge work, and you need help to do it, um, because it's hard to see. I mean, if we could see it, we could go, "Oh, okay, I'll change that." Boom.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And that last part of creating a sense of self, we need to be willing to disappoint or even be judged or even be held in contempt. Man, can you imagine? I hate for a long time. I hated even disappointing my mother just a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
so, that we risk that. So we have to set boundaries, right? This is really hard for us to do. We don't know a boundary from, we think it's a fence on a farm, you know. So we have to be able to identify what the boundaries we need are. And one of the ways to do that is look at the list that we just made, right? But also notice when we're feeling guilty, resentful, unappreciated, or angry. So that's where the boundaries are needed. That's gonna just so looking at that guilty, resentful, unappreciated, angry. When you feel those things, where can I make boundaries surrounding that? Or, what are the things that make me feel that way? That's where you need the boundary. So those
Okay.
specific behaviors that mom does that trigger those feelings.
We're about done here, but let's talk about quickly some signs that this is working. What are some quick finish signs? Because maybe some people have come and they're like, yeah, we've been working on that. Well, okay, good. Here's some signs that your work is working.
So being able to make decisions without consideration of our parent or their approval or input, being able to set healthy boundaries. I mean, that's not just with the parent, but all through life, clearly establish and consistently maintain boundaries, especially with your parent. Emotional independence, no longer feeling responsible for mom's emotional well-being. Oh, well, she's sad. What can I do? No,
Hmm.
I'm not saying we abandon our mothers. We don't. Uh,
No.
but we have to find that actual balance and managing our own emotions separately, having healthy and balanced relationship with our partner, with friends, with other family members, with professional relationships, without any undue parental influence. Our self-identity. This is a rough one to identify, but we'll know it when you know it when you get there. So you have a
Yeah.
strong sense of self-identity and personal goals, which are separate from your parents' influence. Reduced guilt, being able to maintain privacy, being confident when you have to set those boundaries. Your self-esteem is higher. Your self-worth, which is do I matter, exists, and you can feel it. Your personal growth, you actually feel like you're growing as a human being. You're exploring things that you like to do without having to consider anything that your parent might want. Yes, your partner, absolutely, because you're going to make decisions on that together. Conflict resolution, man, you start getting really good at that and not afraid of it, and being able to be assertive, not aggressive, assertive. So being able to handle those conflicts, not just with parents, but in everything, and know and having an emotional support network. If you don't have one of those, that's a sign you're not there. If you have one of those, you're choosing to have one of those. That's a sign that you're making progress.
Yeah. And if you're watching or listening today and you feel like, yeah, you guys have pinned the tail on the enmeshed or your partner, well, maybe it's time that you go to your therapist or coach that you're working with now and say, hey, I'm dealing with enmeshment, and here's what I have discovered. And maybe they can help you. If they can't, find someone who can, because I'm sorry, this is a tough statement to hear, but our mental health is our responsibility. Our emotional health is our responsibility. We have to rescue and help ourselves. We can't constantly be asking everybody else to do it for us. The fact is, you have to choose your hard. It's hard to sit back and just constantly feel frustrated and like you're the bad guy. Eventually, that just sucks. But it's hard to do work and do the heavy lifting and call someone like James or myself and work with them. It's hard to share your heart with people, but if you don't, how will you get better? So choose your heart. It's hard to divorce, it's hard to stay married. Choose the hard, right?
Yeah. So that whole time you were saying choose your hard, I was thinking you were saying heart. So really, isn't that the same thing?
It is. It
And then,
really is.
I just want to say to the enmeshed, this is not only difficult to hear, it's also difficult because you do love your parent. And it is also, you got here honestly. This was not something that you could have helped. And it is something now that you can help. And Sam's right. We have to get ourselves out of this.
And if you find the right people, they're going to reach down into your foxhole and help pull you out and help you see things you cannot see. So today's been a phenomenal day. I have loved this so much. We will be doing a follow-up very soon to this because it's great info. In the meantime, if you need us, you can reach out to us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. Just as a reminder, we don't do any therapy or coaching or advice over email, but we can make minimal suggestions. And a note to people that we love and adore, we are not able to read exhaustive email. Sometimes we get some email and we know you probably find us to be safe, but we're going to start billing you for how long it takes to read those emails. We just can't. We actually respond to our own email. But listen, we are honored that you've joined us today on behalf of James and his wife Sharon, who's a phenomenal therapist and even just human being. You've seen her on my podcast, and you've seen her being interviewed with James. On behalf of them and myself, get help, find somebody safe. If you find the right people, they're going to give you the right pathway to get to the right point in your life. Well, you will be so proud of yourself. Believe me, I never thought that it was possible to do this. Through the work that I've done over almost 2 decades, I have found myself and actually like myself and love myself. Yeah, I have stuff to work on, but I love who I am. James loves who he is. We're still responsible for our actions and some terrible choices, but we are okay with us, and you can be too. We'd love for you to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.